Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome to the Property Couch podcast and welcome to my co-host for this week, Amelia from Undercover Architect, Amelia Lee, who is returning to join us on the Property Couch. Welcome back, Amelia.
Thanks so much for having me, Bryce. It's really good to be here.
I'm excited because today we're going to talk about a topic largely around healthy homes, and we've got a very special guest who is going to help us with that. But because of the subject, I thought a couple of things. One, I loved having you on previously, but two, you are well and truly a subject matter expert when it comes to house design and healthy homes and everything in between. And I figured it would be great to riff it with you with our guest today. So thanks again for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
It's going to be fun. Now, folks, for those listening, Amelia is a very experienced podcaster. She has her own podcast called Undercover Architect. She is the architect behind that award-winning online resource to teach folks how to design, build and renovate their homes. And just to give you an idea of Amelia's background, she's been in the industry for over 25 years and has a solid personal experience in the trenches as a serial renovator. Why are you a serial renovator? You just love the torture of turning your life upside down to renovate, or did you move out when you were doing them?
No, we lived in them whilst we renovated them. We had a baby per renovation. All the kids learned to climb ladders before they walked. So it was definitely, I think it was about 12 years of pretty much living in construction sites. And I'm still learning how to unlearn living in a construction site in this house, So, and it's taken us a little while, but we're actually looking down the barrel of renovating our current home as well. We were a little bit over it all by the time we finished the third project. But yeah, it's a bug that's definitely bitten us. I mean, I grew up in a house where my mum was always doing our place up just cosmetically and sort of always up a ladder with a paintbrush. So I think it's just been something that the idea of improving property to improve the place that you live and also build your own, sort of financial nest egg through the process. It's definitely what's helped us to get to where we are personally, my husband and I. So yeah, it's one of those things. It's I just love it.
Yeah, and it can tell from listening. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. You've got a lot of enthusiasm and passion for what you're doing. Get some great guests on. So little shout out to anyone who is in the design process, looking to redo their home. They're a renovator. There is some amazing resources there, and I recommend that you check that out. Now, the reason I've got you on is we're co-hosting today. You're not necessarily the guest like you were last time, but clearly you've got some subject matter expertise. So I've invited you to do Mindset Minute theme today, Amelia. So we were chatting about this, and you've got a philosophy that you live by, and I reckon it's great. So let's share it with the listeners.
Yeah, so one of the main philosophies that underpins Undercover Architect and a lot of the way that I live is a rising tide floats all boats. I'm a big believer in collaboration over competition, and I think that we're much stronger when we do things together. And for me, having that approach to my business and to the way that I live has enabled me to show up really generously and attract people who equally live their lives really generously and just want to share for the improvement and the advancement of everyone. So yeah, it's a philosophy that definitely has been a really pivotal driver in Undercover Architect's growth and in my life generally.
I love it too, because it's one of the reasons why I resonate with you as a presenter, you with your message, is because you're essentially trying to, as you say, lift everyone up through more information and more experience and more education, which is just perfect for the philosophy of the Property Couch. So there you go, folks. A rising tide floats all boats. So collaboration over competition. I certainly love that. Hey, we're gonna get onto our special guest shortly. His name is Raph Siket. But before we do, I want to talk to you, Amelia, because on the Property Couch, we're on this crusade to get people talking about money over the dinner table. And I want to ask you, what was the money conversations like for you growing up as a girl in your home over the dinner table?
It's a really fascinating question. My parents got divorced when I was about 8 years old, and I was largely raised by my mum beyond that age. My father's actually a chartered accountant, and so you'd think that money would sort of be part of those conversations, but I think my mum worked full time and sort of had this feeling of, another day, another dollar. I know she did the equation on what the difference would be between her working full time and being fully on welfare in terms of raising us. And she was only just fractionally ahead in terms of working full time. But for her, she thought it was really important to teach us a work ethic. And so I've got this whole association that earning money has always been really, really hard. And I know that personally around my money mindset, I've had to unengineer a lot of that stuff. Money doesn't grow on trees. We don't waste things. We don't waste money. Money's not hard to come by. Anybody who comes by money easily is cheating. There's all these kinds of things. Saying that though, the whole idea of property being a really valuable and worthwhile property, like financial investment, and the opportunity that you had to improve the value of your own property through making improvements to it, that was just, whilst it wasn't something that was explicitly talked about around the table, I lived in a house where my mum was constantly repainting the interior walls or repainting the exterior. She added an extension whilst we lived there. So, and she's gone on, she's in her 70s now, but she's gone on to build her own financial, sort of retirement through doing cosmetic renovations to properties still sort of in her 60s and 70s. So yeah, I can see why finances and money being attached to buildings is such a strong kind of thing that I've carried through with me in my life, but it's not something that we sort of sat around the table talking about explicitly.
It was more monkey see, monkey do for you, where you saw it rather than we're talking about it. Some of those beliefs that you talked about are very ingrained beliefs that a lot of people have. Money doesn't grow on trees. If it easy come, easy go. If you get it easy, you're a crook. That there's some really insightful beliefs that you just shared there. So it sounds like on balance sheet you're fine with money, build asset value through property. It's what you do for a living. What about the daily money going over the table? Did you need to overcome anything? Was there other strengths that you had that naturally meant that you were okay with the details with money? And I'm talking about late teenager into your 20s. Was there anything that needed to be overcome?
Yeah, I think I started earning money quite early on through babysitting and those kinds of things. And chatting to my mum, she said we definitely, both my brother and I, our attitude to money definitely changed once we started earning our own and saw the value of, sort of what it took to earn the money. I think that there was just naturally a scarcity mindset that I've had to overcome personally in terms of that we were always making sacrifices. There was never enough. And it was always we were always, just clambering to sort of stay ahead. And so that definitely is something that I've had to personally overcome in terms of just approaching money with a much stronger abundance mindset. And then also that day-to-day stuff, there was always this notion of budgeting, but then splurging when we had so mum would sort of treat herself or, that kind of stuff when things were a little bit easier. And so I've also had to unengineer some of that to sort of be living in a scarcity mindset and then splurging when cash does come through, and then obviously having to jump back then into that sort of budgeting process. So I think that that's been really interesting to sort of see how that's played out. My dad wasn't involved a lot in my life until I was sort of in my sort of very late teens, early 20s. And then I've been a lot closer to him through my 20s and obviously up to now, and have found that his work and his knowledge as a chartered accountant has really helped me understand things like company structures and, tax and those kinds of things. But he has a very conservative outlook on money, very risk averse. So it's been sort of this interesting thing of understanding all the legislation behind it. I've been very grateful that he's been very patient with me. I've got to understand a lot about accounting through Dad just explaining things to me that an accountant would say to me or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely, I see that my attitude to money is quite different to my parents.
Okay. And how are you tracking now with the abundance mentality? Do you feel like you've switched, or is there still some little monsters under the bed from time to time?
There's definitely monsters under the bed. I actually had a mentor say to me something was sort of last year that really has resonated and I've tried to hang on to. They said to me that we're all in the energy of selling relaxation. Doesn't matter what we're selling, what niche we're in, we're all in the energy of, we're all selling relaxation. And when I think about how I work with homeowners, initially I thought it was about helping them feel more confident, but that confidence leads to them being relaxed about the process of building and renovating and how they can have a great experience. Now, if you think about energy and you believe in energy, which I do, if you're not meeting that sales process of selling relaxation with your own relaxed energy, then you're going to be limiting the abundance that's available to you. And so energetically, that's how I'm always trying to turn up, is in a relaxed state where I trust that things are going to be okay, that things are working out exactly as they need to. I believe that the universe works for me, not against me. So, you know, it's all of that kind of stuff to try and sort of sit in that place. And of course, yeah, your engineering and your unconscious beliefs and all of that kind of stuff can always kick up when there's moments of doubts and fears. But yeah, it's really just trying to anchor back to that foundational belief that the universe is working for me, and that I can be relaxed about that.
I love it. And some really good insights there. Selling relaxation, just to land that plane, is that you embodying that as a person and then whatever you show up as, or architecture is being sold, like relaxation has an angle through architecture? Is it your energy, how you show up, or the product that you're involved with, or both?
No, it's my energy as I turn up. So it's, and it's amazing. It works. It's the strangest thing. When I'm in hustle mode and I'm fearful and I'm worried about, those kinds of things, and I'm watching the numbers, I don't see the same results in my business as when I show up relaxed and trusting. And it's one of those things that's very frustrating, because you look at people who are very, very successful, they always seem so relaxed and chilled about it. And I've always put that down to, well, they don't have to worry about where their next meal's being paid from or keeping their mortgage payments going and those kinds of things. They've got cash coming in the door regardless. But I actually think that there's something in accessing that sense and feeling of relaxation that's the secret sauce. It's not because they've got all those things paid for that they're able to access because equally I've seen people who are at that level who still operate from a scarcity mindset, who are hoarding and, those kinds of things. And I
wasn't expecting that, but I think there was some gold there, because I think that it's important that anyone who, we're a property finance and money management podcast. The amount of times I've seen, and I've said this many times in the past, but the amount of times I've seen people derail because they do not have their belief system right. So, on paper, everything seems to be tracking okay, but something derails them. And it's usually some derivative of what you just said, some product of their upbringing that says that they're not in abundance, they're in scarcity. And so they're looking for anything in the world to reinforce that scarcity view so that they can then get that, and then stuff happen. I just look at myself going, how in the world did that happen? And I've got stories of my own, to be honest, around that, where I've had to exercise the own monsters under my own bed around that as well. But that was amazing insight. So thanks for sharing that.
That's my pleasure.
Amelia, I'd love to sit here and chat to you about your experience, because you've got an enormous amount of it. But I really want to pivot to today's very special guest, who is going to be talking about a range of topics that I think will be super interesting. But first of all, it's Raph Siket, who's the director of Ecolibria, which is the leading building biology service company in Australia. He is a qualified building biologist and has completed the most comprehensive course study currently offered in this field. Raph is the past president of the Australasian Society of Building Biologists. He has an advanced diploma in building biology from the Australian College of Environmental Studies and a Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Cape Town. So clearly more degrees than a thermometer here, but there's more. In addition, Raph is a certified mould testing technician, and I've got a story for that later. He's also completed the first-rate 5-star energy rating course and has a certificate in training and assessment qualification. He is very passionate, and let's underline that, very passionate about healthy buildings, and has practiced as a building biologist full-time for over 15 years. Welcome to the Property Couch, Raph.
Oh, thanks so much, Bryce. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to chat, mate. I've got a fair bit to share here. We've got Amelia, who's also going to be drawing out some of your experiences too. But before we get to your subject matter expertise, I want to ask you a question that I've just asked Amelia, and we ask most guests, is what was the discussion around money like for you growing up as a kid at the kitchen table over there in South Africa?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of discussion. I think mine was probably like most old school. My dad was the head the head of the family, and he brought in the money, and mom ran the house, and he sort of apportioned where everything went. And there wasn't a big talk about how much money we had, what we should use it on. Dad was in control, basically, yeah, and there wasn't a lot of talk about it.
What impact did that have on you? So there was no chat. As a teenager, did you have a paper round? Did you have a job in your teenage years, rolling into 20s? How did that come out for you? Were you a good money manager? Did you save well, or did you not learn enough and it just went out the door quickly? What did that look like for you?
Well, I was lucky because my dad was a very good businessman. That's one thing he certainly was. So I worked for him for 3 years when I came out of sort of school and uni and did all my studying. So I actually learned an enormous amount from him. And I've never actually applied for a job in any way because I've always dove straight into that. And then I've always just I've had my own business since then in different fields, but this one for the longest. So yeah, mine was maybe a little bit different because I wasn't doing all of those paper rounds and waitering and all of that type of thing. I sort of was looked after by my dad and then worked for him and then had my own business. That was kind of my transition. I don't know if that's unique or not, but that was my experience.
What about what you share with your kids? You've got twin boys. They go to school with my boys.
Yeah.
What are the messaging that you give them now over the dinner table regarding money?
Yeah, it's a lot more open. I think everyone should be involved in that type of thing. Everyone needs to know. I mean, unless you're in dire straits and you want to keep it from the kids and so on, I really think you need to be quite involved. So we talk about what things cost, the value of money, what's going to happen when you get your own house and how things need to progress. And we're saving for them from the day they were born, 2 savings accounts, and put money aside for them, what we can each, so that it's a surprise. Well, maybe not a surprise anymore, but it'll be a surprise for them. But yeah, it's a much more open discussion.
I think that's good. Amelia, I want to introduce how I met Raph, and I hinted that he and I have kids at the same school. On Monday, we were in lockdown together and we bumped into each other at the local footy oval, kicking the footy with our kids. And Raph, it'd be fair to say that you and I probably, how can I say this? I wasn't that excited to meet you when I first met you because...
Yes, I think that's very politically correctly put, yes.
and Amelia, the story goes like this, right? My youngest son is on the autism spectrum. We had some gut health issues, and my wife and I embarked on a 2-year journey of trying to bring him from the brink of a lot of dysfunction in his health through food, right? So we went on this diet called GAPS, gut and psychology syndrome. And to be honest, it was arduous and I felt really burnt out. And my wife was, if I felt burnt out, she was double down on that, right? And then we made a decision to move from Yarraville in Melbourne's west to Alphington in Melbourne's northeast, so that we could be closer to family, closer to some high school friends, and just really get around, because that 2 years was just intense. It was isolating and it was full on. And so we moved into this house, and we were rent vesting at the time. So I was renting this home in Alphington. And then all of a sudden the M word came up, mould, right? And so Andrea, my darling wife, stumbled across Raph here, who, among other things, is an expert in mould. And so he comes around to our house, and then Raph, it might be helpful for you to help me out here, but let's just say the mould in underneath this old weatherboard house underneath the house was terrible. And for a family that was already dealing with toxicity in my son's body, this wasn't helpful. But so my wife goes, "We got to move," and I'm like, and to be honest, I was burnt out and I didn't want to hear that. Honestly, I didn't want to move. So then she goes, "Well, you can ring Raph yourself." So I rang Raph and I said, and I was using language like, "Can't be this bad. Really, do we have to move?" Like, and so unfortunately, he was introduced, and I can thankfully say now he's a ripper bloke and I love spending time with him. But at the time, Raph was definitely a 4-letter word for all the wrong reasons.
Yes, I did pick that up on the phone call for sure.
So, and Amelia, you've looked into this a lot too, but it's probably a good segue into talking about mould, Raph. Why is it such an issue and why should people care about mould in their house?
Yeah, because mould, generally speaking, fungi is essential to the planet. Like when you talk about bacteria, mould is critical. But the problems come when there are water ingresses and too much water that starts eating away at building materials or condensating and growing on building materials in the house. Then we seem to get nastier kinds of molds with mycotoxins of concern. So, and they can certainly cause just a whole shopping list of different adverse health effects. And it's often, well, the link is being made more and more now to adverse health effects, but in the past, it just went completely undiagnosed. And in my 15, 16 years of doing this, I just find it incredibly rewarding that when I see people do get away from the mold in whatever way they do by moving or remediating it or whatever they do and clean everything up, the changes in the health are remarkable. And that's why we love working with integrative doctors who consider the environmental health and notice these phenomenal differences in people's health when it comes to mold.
Amelia, we didn't work out how we were going to, so I'm just making sure I don't miss any cues for you that you want to jump in. But you talked about integrated doctors there, Raph. That is how we were connected. Our integrated doctor referred us to you. Okay. What does that mean for you when you have to keep going into these houses that, you know, ultimately you're like going into a doctor's surgery right now. It's an epicenter for stuff that's going wrong in the human body. You're going into the epicenter of unhealthy houses.
Yeah, it is a problem. And if you're sensitized in any way, you can't be a building biologist. You can't do this. We do have protection. So we do have respirators, we do have PPE and overalls and gloves and things like that. But, you know, in saying that, you walk into homes, I don't want to come into your home in full PPE. You're freaked out enough by me. If I start putting on full PPE and coming in, like you've got COVID happening there, it's a different story. It really freaks people out. So it is difficult. But when I come home, I will take all the clothes off. They're washed differently and separately. I don't then just go down onto the couch and so on. So there are things we have to do to keep things clean and separated. Because sometimes I take samples, you don't see the mold, get the sample results back and go, oh my gosh, I wish I'd worn a respirator in there and so on. So yes, I need to take care. And sometimes I do take a hit, that's for sure.
I think the thing is that what's really interesting, and you must be seeing this in your work, Raph, is that so many buildings are actually impacted by condensation and the negative impact of condensation. It's seen as one of the most significant detrimental and deteriorating factors in buildings. And I think the stats are something like it's over 40% of buildings are impacted by condensation. And then when you look at the issues around illness and inflammation that can be caused by those that are impacted by a reaction to mold, it often shows up as things like inflammation or brain fog or things that they might just feel a little bit unsure about that aren't really then demonstrating as real symptoms. And if you're not working with an integrative GP, then you can't get that kind of information or that help or that alignment of the fact that your home might be the common factor that's actually causing these things. And I can imagine as a building biologist, are you finding that you're having to sort of have these quite confronting conversations, but also these light bulbs are going off for people that perhaps these symptoms, they're not crazy. There's actually a common thread to these things. And it's, you know, something that they could potentially change if they have more information and some action plan?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Amelia. It's really well summarized. I do go into a lot of homes and I do deal with a lot of tears. So yes, people do break down and have issue because they've been dealing with so much. And in terms of, the light bulb moments, I do remember certain case studies, like one where I went in and there were enormous amounts of issues and they suffer from depression. Depression has a lot of close links with mold exposure, and their kids highly erratic, bouncing off the walls, just doing very odd things. And when they get away, it seems to clear fairly quickly, because they say, look, we've been out the house a few days, we've been in a different environment, and my kids are amazing. They're incredible. They're angels. I just forgot what that was like. I'm not depressed. And they just break down going, I'm not mad. I'm not depressed, just like what you alluded to. So yes, I do have to, like in a lot of things, you have to be a psychologist to a degree, which we're not trained in. We just listen, basically, don't offer a lot of advice, but listen and just give information and let people make their choices. But yes, when they feel better and make the links, it's really rewarding.
When you're confronted with those tears, clearly the next step is, okay, what are the action steps? Because for us, we were lucky it was a rental and we wanted to make a sea change, and we moved down to Torquay. And for the record, before we bought the house that I live in now, you came and checked it out and gave it the all clear, which is great. But for someone who that is their house, that they've been living there for some time, and then now they're confronted with something that clearly has negative health benefits that you've just described, what's the first step? How do they start the process of remediation?
Yeah, well, first is to find out just how contaminated it is. So, because a lot of the time you won't see visible growth. When there's lots of visible growth, it's easy to see, but it can be highly contaminated and you don't see much on all your contents. So by taking samples, we can see what sort of molds are there, because there are some much nastier than others, and to what degrees and what levels. And then you can decide to what degree you remediate. So the first thing is doing a big spring clean. So look, just take the stuff, and what most people should do, and throw away what you don't need anymore, and then go through all the rest of your stuff. Hard surfaces are easy because they're sealed, so metal and sealed timber surfaces and so on. Those are very easy because you can use microfiber cloths and sort of wipe those down and HEPA vacuum. The problem comes with the real fabric stuff, mattresses and linen and all those blankets and things like that. They're very difficult to remediate, but we do a lot of post-remediation testing when there've been big insurance claims and things. So we know what works and what doesn't work. And one tip, which everyone thinks is rudimentary, but basically if you can wash all your stuff, like clothing and linen and so on, but like the old days and rugs and so on, go out there and give it a good whack with the stick like the rugs, and with clothes, shake them out. And get rid of those, because when mold dies, the mycotoxin doesn't become inactive. Non-viable mold or dead mold, you breathe that in, it's still a problem. So it's a matter of removing it more than what chemical concoctions must we use to kill it all. When you go to your new place, that's the most critical thing. So if you're going to take stuff that's maybe not completely remediated into a place that's damp and got moisture issues, then there's a big risk of things happening again. But if you've remediated to the best you can and it's very good, or there's a little bit left, but you're going to a very good place that is not supportive of mold, that's not elevated moisture, then you shouldn't have the problems at all. So it's a matter of being balanced. I have many clients who talk to me almost every week, really, really disturbed and freaked out about how to get rid of everything. And you'll see online, it's always the worst case scenario. Where everyone has to throw everything away and burn down the house and all of that. It's not always like that. But if you're sensitized, if you've got susceptibilities, little bits of mold can be debilitating. So it depends on your own susceptibility and just how bad the situation was, and then working out to what degree remediation should be done.
Raph, can you perhaps just talk through what you did for Bryce in terms of inspecting the property at Torquay? Because I know that, sometimes people will go and look at a property and for all intents and purposes, it looks totally fine. But what they don't understand is that there's a recurring leak in a bathroom ceiling or something like that, that the last owner has just basically painted over for the sake of resale. There might also be issues with water coming in or rising damp or something like that can be concealed at that point of sale, that then doesn't rear its head until, several months down the track of somebody living in the home. How do you actually go through that process of examining a property that somebody might be inspecting and considering to put an offer in on?
Yeah. So basically, you try and stay very clear of the person who's not on your side, like Bryce in this situation. And then you try
I came around a little bit then, didn't I?
You try and side with the person who's got you in, and they often are two different people in the same relationship. And then the most important thing is the visual inspection and asking questions. People think you just browse over that, but that is the most important thing. You need to study the building from the outside and look at how shaded it is. Often the biggest problem can just be it's not got enough natural sunlight. The drainage around the building, there are many aspects outside that you need to look at. Then you come inside and you do the same thing, but we take a lot of moisture readings. We take moisture readings in the air, we take moisture readings in the building materials, floors, showers, things like that, thermal cameras. Basically, we're looking for moisture. And can moisture affect the building? Has it affected the building in any way? And it comes from experience to notice what to look for and where to find these moisture issues. And in Bryce's case, again, no big visible mold issues. I think one of the showers, like many showers, had an issue. That's just grouting, breaking down and being porous over time and so on. But the big issue at their place in Alphington was that there was groundwater and bad drainage. And it was a very difficult thing to fix, because in order to try get in that drainage, you had to pull up all sorts of very established landscaping and work. And there's not a guarantee that you'll get it all. And how deep do you need to go? And once it's water that's coming in from the ground, it can be tricky. Because we've had cases where even if you do an inspection, you can't find what's wrong because it's a neighboring council pipe that's been burst by the roots of the trees over time and just happens to come into your property and so on. So very difficult. But as soon as you look under the house, we have subfloor spaces in Australia in a lot of properties, and they're often just shine a torch under there. And if it's wet under there and it's damp, there's a problem somewhere, and we just need to know how big or small it is. But that's what we found at Bryce's place.
The other thing too is, I think that all of those things are fantastic. Some locations though, the humidity is such that it's always going to be ripe for mold growth as well too, isn't it? Because sometimes as soon as you get over 70% relative humidity, that's an environment where mold can start growing. So you then need to start looking at dehumidifiers or air conditioning units that have a dehumidification process in them as well. Do you find that that's part of some of your remediation advice to homeowners, that they're going to need to purchase a dehumidifier or have some dehumidification process that they have daily happening in the home?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're, as you allude to, if you're in an environment that's very humid, and it's always going to be a battle and a problem, then you have to use what we call these Band-Aids or management systems, because it is what it is. But again, the key comes to trying to have a well-insulated home. If we're going from the beginning or renovating, I think energy recovery ventilation systems should be used a lot more here and be much more common in those areas. So you can strip humidity. For everyone who doesn't know, it's pulling in air from the outside, which is very humid, strip the moisture out of that air and put it into the home and then expel it, and constantly ventilate, but constantly stripping out moisture. When you can't do that, all you can do is just use dehumidifiers, as you say. But then we have to concentrate a lot on those three areas of the kitchen where you're cooking and making sure extraction goes to the outside. Same thing in the bathroom, all the extraction must go to the outside. And so cooking and showering are the two biggest. And then in the bedroom, where you're breathing out all the time, and if you've got single glazing and it's warm and humid, it just condensates all over. So do you use curtains or blinds? And there's just so many different aspects to it. But yes, in humid areas, you've got to be a lot more vigilant.
I've got to go on record as saying my wife made the right decision too, Raph, and we talked tongue in cheek about it, that I was anti you, but the right decision was made. My son is now out of that environment. He's now thriving with a combination of a healthy home and also being near the ocean, right? I just want to reinforce the point that this is really important. Now, at the time that you came into our house, Raph, that particular year I was going overseas 4 times. I was shooting 9 episodes of a television program at the same time as running a business. Like, I was just exhausted, and I just didn't have the bandwidth in my mind to process what was a very, very serious effect that was being placed on my family. So I'm forever grateful that we did that. But there is some PTSD around mold for me, right? Because my wife doesn't do things by halves, I've got to be honest, and you know her very well, Raph. So we were cleaning everything. So like all of the Lego got individually cleaned. We got 2 guys over from Airtasker to come and get some god-awful stuff that we had to clean everything. Like, it was an enormous process to move out of that house. And we pretty much moved with the percentage of furniture in the Alphington house to the percentage of furniture we took was very low, right? Because I've got a son that's very susceptible to toxicity, right? So, but I just do want to go on record that my wife made the right choice. It was important. I want to encourage everyone who's listening to this to not be like me and just throw it away or try and sweep it under the carpet. But I'm also acknowledging that it is a big deal, because when you were describing it before, we're saying, okay, let's move out and move to a new place. But for a lot of people, they don't have that luxury. They're actually in a place where they've got to deal with it and then not move to another place. They've got to move back in. And so that's challenging. So it's an important point, and I'm happy for you to reinforce any other key points you want on this topic. But one of the things that I'm excited to chat about with you today, and one of the reasons I'm keen to lean on Amelia's expertise here too, is, mate, I want to introduce the concept of a passive home. I want you to explain what a passive home is, and then we want to talk about what you actually did with your own home, because of this passion around, on the negative side, eliminating stuff like mold, but on the positive side, you've created an environment which is incredibly positive for you and your family around some really cool principles. So happy for you to chime in if there's anything we've missed on the mold discussion for either of you. But if we do pivot to passive homes, Raph, and healthy homes, for those people who don't know what a passive home is, what is it?
So in terms of a passive house, I think a lot of people say that passive means that you don't have to put any energy into the house, no gas, no heating, no anything, and the sun does it all, and the orientation and the materials and so on. But there is, you've got to put in some energy. There's a certain figure and a number, which I don't know what that is, but it's very low, therefore regarded as passive. And I think just it just makes so much sense to me that the orientation is such that you get a lot of natural sunlight and warmth, and the insulation is enormous, so that you are maintaining that temperature that comes in. You make the best of all the heating, and of course it depends on your environment. But I just think it makes so much sense, because it goes hand in hand with a healthy building, except if you don't ventilate properly. And this does seem to be a big problem with so-called very high Energy Star rated houses, or even sometimes passive. Passive houses are big on ventilation, but there are some where it hasn't been in the past, and then a mold explosion occurs, because all this moisture we talk about is now so well insulated in the house, but it needs to constantly ventilate. So heat recovery ventilation systems are a big part of passive houses, which means that the air is being exchanged all of the time. So all your wet areas, kitchen, bathroom, laundry, the air is being exhausted 24/7, and air from outside is coming in, filtered, and is fresher air. But that heat you don't lose from the house. There's a heat exchanger, and it transfers that heat to the incoming cooler air. And in summer, it bypasses that and so on. So it's better. But the air is controlled. It's quiet, because everything, like in ours, is triple glazed. And something that's unusual, it's not spruced as passive house, is that there's no creepy crawlies. Because they wrap the house, the roof and everything, we turned around and went, before we had cockroaches, we had spiders, we had silver moth, all the usual pests, rats and mice. And since we have this passive house, we don't have any pests. We're like, where did Daddy Longlegs gone? Like, we don't mind them. Where they gone? And they scurry in when you open the door. That's the only way they make it in. The rest of the time, everything's completely sealed. So you don't have to use any pesticides like a lot of people use. So it just makes sense that it's comfortable, it's quiet, it's good air quality, and it's well insulated and uses very little to heat and cool.
Amelia, what's your experience with passive and how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I, since sharing more about Passive House with the Undercover Architect community, I've seen a really high level of interest in it. And one of the big things about Passive House is that you need to use a Passive House certified tradesperson or builder to build the home, and the amount of modeling that happens during the design phase that then is checked up as part of the construction. So they use a PHPP modeling tool, which basically tests and measures how the design is going to work in terms of energy savings and energy use, so that they can get that equilibrium between those two things in the insulation and the passive solar design and the heat recovery system and those types of things. They take into account the amount of heat and energy that we as humans are producing, that, in terms of cooking our meals, in occupying the house. So all of that gets factored into the modeling tool. And then during construction, the Passive House certified tradesperson or builder has to basically do a bunch of checks and measures to demonstrate that the house is being built as per that modeling. Now, that's something that is currently missing from standard residential construction. And so there's a lot of people who see that Passive House is actually a way that they can get certainty that they're actually getting the house that they designed built in the finished product. One of the things to be aware of about housing generally in Australia is that on average, it measures at about 1.5 stars energy rating. Now, our base level for an Energy Star requirement in this country is 6 stars. That's still a base. It's a very low base. It hasn't changed for over 10 years. We're hoping, keeping our fingers crossed, that there's going to be a change to 7 stars in the National Construction Code for 2022. But it's a very sort of poor performance. And yet that most houses are at 1.5 stars energy rating. Passive House, you're seeing greater energy efficiency. And you're also seeing greater control over your indoor air environment. A lot of homeowners think that, am I ever going to be able to open a window? Am I going to be feeling like I'm living in a box, a vacuum that's just airtight? And I think when people actually go to experience what it's like to be in a passive house, they realize that they're actually getting to control the quality of their indoor air environment. We spend now we're spending over 90% of our time in indoor environments. A large part of that, more than ever before, is in our homes. And yet we're living in environments that, the indoor air quality is absolutely terrible. And I think that the stats around they look around in terms of passive house, they measure the air changes per hour. So you have to, as part of building the passive house, you get blower door tests to actually, where they seal up the house and they pump air in at a particular volume and rate. And that then measures the amount of leakage that's happening from the home's envelope. And the builder has to achieve 0.6 air changes per hour or less in order for it to be certified. So they do that before the lining goes on the inside of the house, so that they can make sure that all of the exterior is sealed the way that it needs to be. So then that the mechanical and heat recovery ventilation systems can be the things controlling the air change. Now, an average house in Australia has anywhere between 15 air changes per hour and 49 air changes per hour. And that's just happening through the cracks around our windows, through the cracks in floorboards, skirting boards. It's air coming in and out that we can't control because of the leaky way in which our buildings are constructed. And with that air change is coming vapor and moisture and toxins and things that we can't control as well. So the passive house does offer an alternative to being able to create a much more controlled indoor air environment, and a much more comfortable one as well.
Which is how I would describe your house, Raph. Having been in there, it is a unique environment and experience to be in that passive space. Now, because I'm the least qualified in this conversation to talk about it, I've gone to Google prior to this conversation, and it appears that there's 5 basic principles, and you two will let me know if I've missed any or if I'm wrong. But number 1 is solar orientation. Number 2 is high insulation. 3 is high performance windows, and you talked about triple glazing before, Raph. Number 4 is an airtight enclosure, and number 5 is balanced ventilation and heat recovery. So essentially, what we're trying to do is create an environment that's airtight, that is using natural elements to try and heat and cool, so that we can A, save on cost, B, increase the experience we have in the house. And probably the third one we didn't think about, Raph, is to make sure there's no daddy long legs in the house.
Exactly.
So your story is unique. Raph, because there's a fair bit of money that goes into transforming your home to become passive, which is what you did. But tell us a bit about your house, what it was before, and what made you well, I think given your experience and your qualifications is the reason why you did it, but what turned professional life into your personal life and actually pulling the trigger and doing this on your own home?
Yeah. Well, basically it was a volume built home, 2006 odd, so 15 odd years old. And as I basically finished studying, as I started studying, this house finished. So I started realizing how bad I don't want to say how bad, but the shortcomings of volume built homes as I was beginning to learn about this all. And then I lived in it for 15 years and experienced how the building performs, how uncomfortable you are in it, how much heating you need and cooling you need, and how uncomfortable it is. So it's almost like I think I was supposed to live in this house to learn a lesson, and all the lessons, and then said, no, this is ridiculous. Most people want to move into their new house for Christmas. I said, I'm not spending another winter in this house. I need to move in before winter hits again, because I'm not wiping condensation off these silly aluminium single glazed windows anymore, and just ridiculousness. I'm a building biologist and I'm living in ridiculous building. So I took on this project and we filmed everything. Now, I wasn't looking for passive house. I just said I wanted to create a building biology healthy building. But when I was looking around for builders, what really struck me about passive house is the quality of the build. You have to build it so meticulously with such good quality. And the passive house builder that I used said, you know, that's strange, because that's the same reason why I got into passive housing. I was going around Europe looking at buildings and went, gosh, look at these passive house buildings. Look how beautifully they're built. And he said, I got into it for the quality side of the building as well. So anyway, we filmed tearing the whole thing apart. So the roof came off, the ceilings came down, all the windows and doors came out, the bathrooms were gutted, all the internal walls, plasterboard walls. It's a brick veneer home. So brick veneer on the outside and plasterboard walls, they all came down internally. So that we could put insulation in the walls, because there was not even insulation in the walls, only in the roof. And filming everything and showing, I think we found 5 carcasses of rats and mice in wall cavities and all. They said, Raph, we're up to 6 carcasses now, photographing them all because they all die within there. The mess in the roof cavity, it was just horrendous. It was really eye-opening as you strip only 15 years old, as you strip this thing back and you see where everything went wrong.
Did the neighbours sort of look at you and go, mate, what are you doing? Did you have a fire inside or something? And you go, no, this is by choice. Exactly
right. They're going, there's nothing wrong with your building. It looks like any other 15-year-old. Why are you pulling the whole thing apart? And we're going, because it's a mess. It's horrendous. So the builders, I must say, I needed very special permission and patience coming and filming everything every 2 minutes, asking, what's this and why are you doing that? And is that a problem? But then we started retrofitting to passive house, which everyone goes, well, that's ridiculous. You can't take the bones of a volume built home and go to passive house. So they used the PHB, like you alluded to, Amelia, but they said, look, because we've got everything working against us in terms of a volume built home, the main thing they couldn't address is it's on a concrete slab. And they said, we can't insulate the slab. That has to be done from the beginning. So that's always going to be a really weak point in this renovation, because the slab is a massive weak point. So he said, we're just going to go to the nth degree on everything else. So we got the triple glazing from Germany, timber frames, they're composite frames, so they're aluminium clad on the outside, so you don't have to upkeep them, but it's a full timber frame. We put a new roof on. We put rows of insulation in the roof going one way, and then insulation bats going the other way, so that you actually get a really good seal. We tore down the ridiculous impermeable foil wrap that we also find from an electromagnetic field point of view is an issue, because it's quite conductive, being just a foil wrap. And we replaced that with the smart wraps and airtight membranes and so on of passive house. Put in the heat recovery ventilation. I dug around my entire house. They said, Raph, that's your job. It's going to cost this much. And I went, look, I'll do the manual digging. That doesn't require skill, so I'm up for it. And dug around the whole house, sloped all the land away from the house, basically ensured that there was geofabric under decks, and so water didn't, all sorts of things that people would never even think of. And the easiest way to explain how it feels afterwards, and the builder said this to me, he said, you can't explain to people about passive house. You have to experience it. And he said, the easiest way I can explain it is that when you step out of your door on a sunny 24-degree day, in your core, you just feel so comfortable and warm. That's how it feels in a passive house all the time. It's not hot air blowing on you, so you think, oh, I think I'm warm, but I'm actually quite uncomfortable. You just feel comfortable in your core. Everything is just, all of the objects are not freezing cold. Everything's neutral. Everything just works and is quiet and comfortable.
Well, mate, unlike Amelia, who lives in probably the best part of Australia for temperature, in my view, being there in northern New South Wales, you and I live in this freezing cold place in winter. So you said that the deadline was winter. What was driving you more to not live another Torquay cold feeling, or the sense of that feeling that you've just described? Which was the main motivator?
Oh, I don't know. That's a pretty close call. Yeah, I'd say, yeah, both. In that my wife feels the cold. She's like, it's freezing if it's sort of below 26 degrees. So that's a hell of a challenge. I mean, even a passive house is not going to be 26 degrees all the time. So I said, look, we'll just build the best we can. So a very big motivating factor was trying to make the house as warm and comfortable as possible in the winters. I suppose I'd have to say that was the overwhelming. But as a building biologist, a healthy building was more, if not a bigger motivation, saying I'm sick of all the condensation, all the stuff blowing in through the roof cavity, feeling uncomfortable all the time. I've had enough. People should not live like this. Everyone's right should be to live in a comfortable home, not one that's uncomfortable and just heated and cooled, putting enormous pressure on the environment and power grids and so on. I think it's crazy.
What was your initial reaction, Amelia, when I told you about Raph and it was a volume built home that he turned into a passive head? Because that's kind of unique, right? And what was your initial thinking?
Yeah, I always get really excited to hear about homeowners like Raph who are so passionate about, because many people would have just demolished and started again, and all of that, construction material going into landfill. I think it's amazing that Raph's been able to create this and demonstrate that you can actually improve, a lot of different building types. And if you're getting the right information up front and you have, clear goals in mind about what you're seeking to achieve, it's very clear that Raph's been able to completely turn around the nature of this home into something that is actually going to have longevity, be durable, be comfortable for them to live in and for people beyond them to live in as well. So I always get really excited because I feel like it takes the passion of individual homeowners one house at a time for us to really move the needle on something that isn't legislated, that, but does dramatically improve our impact of our built environment on climate change and on the quality of living environments that we get to live in. And for somebody living in a passive house, I mean, I can imagine, Raph, that just totally changes who you are and how you show up in the world, because you're living in a home that's comfortable and supports your health and well-being on a daily basis. You're not fighting against it. It's not another thing that you have to contend with, as part of your everyday life.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's so insightful, that sentence, Amelia, because it's true. You feel so content with all these things in your home. There's not problems every weekend. I've got my weekends back. I'm not fixing this or dealing with this drama because that's leaking, whatever. And you just feel content, saying I can get on with other stuff and everyone in my home's comfortable. I know it's a healthy environment. And you're more happy with life because it's such an important place. I'm so passionate about buildings that affect your psychology enormously, in my opinion.
We've got a couple of listener questions coming up for both of you shortly. But before we get there, Raph, there's a couple of other choices that you've made in terms of building your home, obviously around passive principles, but can you talk us through the EMF electrical circuitry that you've set up? And also one that's particularly you got my wife's interest, and it'll be something that we do in ours, around paint choice.
Yeah, so I'll come back to paint. Paint is really difficult, but in terms of the electromagnetic fields, I think this is as critical as mold. I really do, because electromagnetic fields increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. So if there are high electromagnetic fields, you're just more susceptible to everything, mold and other things. So what we did was we rewired the whole house. So the general things is that we run cabling away from areas where you spend time. So you can run cabling almost like a commercial building. You bundle it, run it down the hallway, and then come out in runs to where you need switches and power points, rather than the spaghetti cabling that is standard and just wrapped around a building. Then we used master switches for power circuits. So the bedrooms were on their own circuit. So we have our main bedroom and then the kids' bedroom separate, because we go to bed at different times. So the master bedroom, when we go to bed, we flick a master switch off, which looks like a light switch just above the light switch. And all that is the equivalent of going outside and flicking that circuit breaker off for the power circuits in that room. But you can just do it from the inside. And similarly with the other bedrooms and the kids' bedrooms, as soon as they go to bed, we turn that off. And every power point is dead in that area. So it just means that voltage doesn't sit in the cabling, all in the walls, and wait at these power points for you to use them, because that voltage has an electrical field associated with it and can affect people, especially with metal frame beds and so on. So that's one thing we did. The lighting circuits are on what we call demand switches. Now, these things are common in Europe. I don't know why they're not common here. They should be. Basically, you are not having any voltage in your lighting circuits at all until you actually demand power and you turn on the switch. So as soon as you go to a light to turn it on, there's no delay or anything. You wouldn't even know it's on a demand switch. The light comes on, but you decide how you're going to run circuits and which lights are going to be on what circuit. And you need to go through this carefully with your electrician so that you see how you live, what lights you like to have on and so on. And basically, when you turn a light on, it will supply voltage and power to that circuit of lighting, however many lights are on that circuit. So the more circuits you have, the better it is, because you've got more flexibility. When you turn something on, you're turning on these. But the rest of the time, like all during the day, if you've got natural sunlight, we don't have the lights on. So there's no voltage at all or running in any cables whatsoever. So, and it's only there when you turn it on. So those few things make an enormous difference. And then just staying away from utilities. So we don't want meter boxes and evaporative coolers, units, ducted heating units, hot water systems. None of that must be behind couches where you spend time during the day, or behind your bed head, quite in particular, where you're resting and repairing. So those are some of the things we've done. And then we hard cabled for all wireless. There's no Wi-Fi in the house. There's no wireless at all, which people then glaze over. As soon as you say that, they go, no, that's impossible.
You know, kill my convenience, aren't you?
that's it. Always that's when all the males in the household don't want to pay my bill. They just go, no, now you've ruined the relationship. Take away the tech, get out. But in my opinion, what we've done is cable in for the kids. We've given them a workstation for as they grow older. We cable with shielded Cat6 cable, so that it's Ethernet cable basically, but with a little foil over the wiring. Our TVs all have Ethernet cable. Our computers all have it. Our phone, we have a landline. My mates say I'm the only one where there's a landline. True. Everyone else has a mobile only. And they said, you're actually more contactable on the landline. I said, yeah, because I hate my mobile. I throw it aside on the weekends. So this is what we've done. Hard cabling is a big thing. So we can stream movies. We can go on the computer and the internet as much as we can, but you go to your computer to do that. You don't just walk around the house and lie on the couch and just bury your head in devices wirelessly. everyone has fast connectivity, but they have it at the workstation. Get up and go to the computer and look up what you want and come back down. We don't sit at tables with phones and iPads and all that sort of nonsense. And even Nintendo, like they've even got Nintendo. Everyone goes, how can you have a Nintendo as a building biologist? But we have cabled remotes. The Nintendo switch is on flight mode. So there's no wireless transmission. So I'm just saying this to say you can still have all of this connectivity and fun. It's just connect with a cable. And one more thing. So when I actually, with the modem, when I said I wanted how many Ethernet ports are there in the back of the modem because we cable connect and so on. And they said, oh, it's such a pleasure. We'll send that out to you. And yes, you can turn off the Wi-Fi, no problem. And they said, I said, why do you sound so relieved? Like my request must be quite unique. And they go, because we know we're not going to have any more phone calls from you and complaints because everyone phones because there's so much wireless in the house. Everything's interrupting with everything. And everyone complains about the service and the dropouts. But if we know your whole house is cabled, we know you're not going to have issues. So yeah, to a degree, in my opinion, it's much better than going wireless for that little bit of inconvenience and not sitting on the couch. But I say, if you want to occasionally sit on the couch or sit outside, well, then turn the Wi-Fi on. You're not going to die. Turn the Wi-Fi on and use your wireless and then come back in when you're finished and turn it off.
A couple of questions for me, Raph, with that is you said done a lot in Europe, doesn't get a lot done in Australia. How much does cost have to do with that? Like, because what you said makes logical sense, on demand, let's keep the EMF away from where we are. Like, it just makes sense, but it all comes down to economics, essentially, for a lot of people. What additional cost did that put onto the project for someone who's listening to this going, well, that's something that I'd like to think about? And two, what are the benefits of, because I've been there, it's like a normal electrical switch, and just above it, you flick the switch off and there we go, the circuit, and near the kids, you've got this tiny little night light that stays there. So it'd be interesting to get your feedback on how that works. But what are the benefits and what were the costs?
Okay. So in terms of that night light, so yes, what we did was when you have 3 bedrooms, there's a sort of common hall area, if you will, amongst all the bedrooms and the bathroom. We had one power point there where we said, okay, run the cabling away from any bedrooms, but give that power all the time. That's not on the master off switch. So if we do want something in that area, like a night light, our night light we just plug in and it's a red light, so it's not blue or whatever for those reasons in the blue light spectrum, but that is put on, so we still have power in that area. In terms of costs, there's not an enormous cost that this entails, because you've got the electrician there running all the cabling. There will be a bit more cabling because you're not doing spaghetti as the crow flies to the nearest point. You're coming away, so there will be some extra cabling, but it's not enormous. In the scheme of things, it's not a big jump. The Ethernet cabling, yes, it's not wireless, so you've got to run Ethernet cables. But Cat6a shielded Ethernet cabling is much more expensive than an Ethernet cable. You might pay 76 cents a running meter, for example, for standard cabling, and you might pay $4 for shielded cabling, for example. There were some circuits we couldn't get away, so we used shielded cabling. That's another thing. So it's more expensive, but in the scheme of things, if you've got a $500,000 build or $700,000 build, this, instead of the cabling and the electrical costing $4,000, it might cost $6,000 because of the extra shielding cabling. So when you look in the scheme of things, if you look at the individual cost of the cable, yes, it's significantly more for these shielded things. But to cable in this way and say, no, I want these circuits and those circuits, it's not a big additional cost. They're running those circuits anyway. But you just say, I want these on one circuit and these on another. And there are a few little extra points in the circuit board. It's not a big expense extra, it really isn't.
And Raph, the on-demand light switches, how did you go about sourcing those and running those through with the electrician and then being confident that they're all going to be okay?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's a nightmare in terms of getting it approved here in Australia. So there are some that are certainly not approved. and they have to be approved here in Australia. There were gigahertz solutions ones that used to sell here all the time and then decided to pull out because they're not approved. But there were certain ones in Europe. We use El Taco, and they were approved in New Zealand, met all the standards there, and all of that paperwork could transfer across. But we're still busy dealing with that type of thing. But our electrician who puts it in says that he has all the paperwork to say that these, because they meet all of the standards in Europe, but they still have to be technically passed here in Australia. Because they are in New Zealand, we've used this particular brand here in Australia as well, because the electrician will have to cover all of those insurance issues. If something goes wrong and he's put in a demand switch that's not approved here, that's all on him. So yeah, he has done a lot to get those particular demand switches over the line here in Australia, which is not easy. It's ridiculous. We actually emailed them in Germany, and they emailed back, gave us all the documents. We gave it to the Australian board, and they said, no, that's fine. We want the actual test results. I said, but it's passed. You can't, the test results are there because you can't pass it in Europe, which are much stricter standards. But anyway, it's quite pedantic and will take up too much time to explain, but we managed to get some over the line, yeah.
So what does that mean professionally, Amelia? Because the electrical circuit board sounds straightforward. Does it translate into practice as simple as Raph's passionate about it, right? But does it transfer into practice for that? And then is that a barrier that's quite hard to overcome based on the lighting switches that Raph just described?
Yeah, it's one of the big challenges with a lot of sustainability products in the Australian industry generally, is that they'll have statutory approvals wherever they're manufactured, but it can be really costly for companies to put that through the same testing and measures that they need to meet Australian standards. We're a pretty small market, in the grand scheme of things for a lot of European businesses. And so that can be really challenging. And then there's also, Raph, I can imagine having conversations with the electrician and the two of them nutting it out as two professionals for a homeowner to think about whether that's too much risk that they might want to take on. Or I can imagine, Raph, how important it was for you to have a team of, builders and electricians that were all on board the fact that you wanted to create the house in this way. That would have been pivotal, because a lot of electricians would have said, no, this is just too hard. I'm not going to wear this risk. So I think this is the thing when you want to do a home that is of a particular, wants to meet a particular sustainability metric, or it's passive house, or those kinds of things, your team is going to become critical, because as a homeowner who's not in the industry, you're going to be able to drive your passion and your mission so far, but you're going to need to galvanize the mission and vision of other people to help you deliver that. And so you're going to need to create a team that really considers this to be important and is willing to do the hard yards, like Raph's electrician was, of being willing to take on that risk and then keep pushing through to get those switches recognised by Australian standards as well.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Amelia, exactly right. The team is critical. And I had these wonderful passive house builders from Geelong, the only ones down our way and in our area that are passive house certified. And they allowed me to sort of own and supply a lot of things, trades and products, because of this type of project and what it was. And the electrician was one of those, amongst others. Yeah. And sorry, you mentioned paint, didn't you?
Well, I was going to round out this discussion before we go on to the listener questions, Raph, with paint, carpet, and anything that has any form of toxic release, even down to the floorboards that you chose rather than engineered boards, all those sorts of things. So as a group discussion, any products in the house that had toxicity was on your radar. So some of the lengths that you went to make sure that you minimized bringing any artificial toxins in to this wonderful environment that you've created.
Yeah, so that's a big question, because there are so many, from all the glues and adhesives and boards and so on. But to do sort of maybe some of the main ones, paint is actually one of the hardest ones, even though you think, well, there's so many paints out there and they're all spruced as low VOC or no VOC. There's a big problem with this industry in terms of VOCs, and lots of court cases going on in the US in particular.
Let's quickly explain VOCs are.
Oh, sorry, volatile organic compounds, which basically just referred to chemicals off-gassing from the material or the product. And we've just found that sometimes no or low VOC is not necessarily so. There are semi-VOCs. Without getting sort of too into it and technical, the summary is that when you get a paint that is wonderful, you can get these wonderful milk-based paints, you can get clay paints, you can get wonderful lime paints and so on. But the more natural it is, the less durable it is. And it's very difficult to get past that. So when you've got a home with kids like we have, running amok, playing soccer and bouncing off the walls, they're going to look like rubbish very, very quickly. And they're a horrible, very horrible finish. Some European paints are made to go on plaster, not on plaster board, but hard plaster and renders. It doesn't look as nice on plasterboard. There are many different things. So I say, look, you need to get sample pots of whatever it is you want to do, but you need to choose between something that's acrylic and very no or low VOC, or something that's very breathable and natural, but is not going to be as durable. And that's different for every client, as opposed to what they're happy with. So there's not a short answer for paint. Go get this one, or this one. You really have to decide on your lifestyle. People without kids can have different paints to people with kids, and it goes on. In terms of our floors, we pulled up a lot of tiles because it's so cold. Goodness, we didn't realize what a silly thing that is to do in our climate. Tiles, maybe up north where you're, Amelia, tiles are perfect, but here they are not perfect for living areas. And so we pulled those up and put down boards, timber boards. But I went in thinking, well, I'm going to do solid timber boards with natural oil finish for sure. That's what we always do. But because we have so much western and northern sunlight, a natural timber board, no matter what you do to it and treat it, will start moving over time. And you will get it splitting and so on. I did so much research on this and went to so many floorboard people, and they said, look, this is the best solid board you can get. But look how it's all changing and splitting and moving, because it's timber, it's natural timber, that's what it does. So you've got to be happy with that, that it will sort of move around quite a bit and open up a bit. Very difficult to avoid that if there's sun. If there's areas where there's no direct sunlight and harsh stuff like west, you won't have that problem. So again, it varies depending on where the floors are. So it's not, again, a straightforward answer. You have to look at each room individually and how much sun and all of that type of thing. So in the end, it was one compromise we made where we did go with engineered timber boards. But we used, for the top layer, we used a reclaimed board. So all the timber was reclaimed from bridges, buildings that are pulled down and so on. And you can see the nail marks. It's just, every single board was so unique in its character. And it's just wonderful and beautiful, but expensive because it's a hell of a process to fix up a salvaged board. But I looked at the glues. There are many different kinds of glues. There are no formaldehyde in these glues that we use. Formaldehyde's a big problem in so many of these products. So we looked at, and then the treatment of the board. When you put a natural oil on, it's beautiful, it's lovely, but you see scratches and scuff marks and everything so easily that it looks terrible after a while, and you've got to sand it all back. So we used an LED cured hard wax oil, which is quite unique. Here in Australia. It's from Holland, been around for a while, but not readily available here. The people we use were amazing. And literally they put on, it's a mixture between a natural oil and a wax. It's put on through there, and then they run an LED light over it and it cures instantly. You can bring the furniture in straight away. You don't have to keep out of the house for however many hours or half a day and drying. You can move in straight away and no odor whatsoever. So yeah, and what you glue the board down with to the slab, enormous amounts of research to see which product are we going to use there. So yeah, there was a lot that went into it, and that's why we filmed it all. And that's why I want to put it out and give this information so that people can make their decisions better and actually see it, so they can flick it onto their builder and say, builder, this is how I want this done. And this is why, rather than trying to explain it, there's actual footage seeing it.
We're going to help you with that, Raph, because we're going to have some links in our show notes so that people can go and look at those videos, which you've kindly said that they can do, which is phenomenal, right? But I think, Amelia, it's clear that Raph's passionate. I can tell you from lived experience that, bumping into Raph in the school playground before he did this project, all I had to do was say, "How's the building on?" It was off to the races, like, and I found it fascinating. And then clearly I've been into his house and I've still found it fascinating as well. So we've kind of done the quick version of unhealthy homes to healthy homes, and we could probably dive in. I could dive in a heap more on a lot of stuff, and I know you could too, Amelia. But we've got a couple of listener questions that we've got to get to. Raph, the first one's for you, and then the second one is for Amelia to have a crack at. But let's cut to that now and have a listen to the question from Maggie on SpeakPipe.
Hi, this is a question for Amelia and Raphael. I'm particularly interested in healthy homes, and specifically when you have to put a meter box on the wall of a bedroom. Does that impact the health of someone sleeping with their head against that wall? And is there a way, if you can't put the meter box anywhere else, of protecting them? And the second question is, how do you prevent mould coming into a home, and particularly bathrooms? And if you do have mould, how do you get rid of it?
There you go, Raph. Question for you about where to put meter boxes and the mould. We probably covered a bit of that, but you might want to round out if there's anything that we missed. But what advice have you got for Maggie around where to put the meter box in the home?
Yeah. So when it comes to meter boxes, it's one area that I'm quite passionate about, because I feel I've had people who are very close to me who have either got very ill or passed away or had all sorts of issues from sleeping behind meter boxes. I think it should not happen at all. So the meter box, for example, in Sweden is not put on houses at all. It's put at the front of the property. And when we design from scratch, we do the same. We say, put it next to the post box. That's where the meter box can go. Build a little enclosure for it. It goes in there and you run the cabling to the house. You can have the switchboard there, but not the meter box. It must never go on the back of any bed head or couch area where you spend time, because from long-term exposure, I have seen many debilitating things happen. So even Nicole Belsma, who runs the Australian College of Environmental Studies for building biologists here, says that her 9 miscarriages, which is not a secret, she puts it in a book, that she believes that was all caused from sleeping, behind a meter box on her bed. So, and I've noticed many other things coming from that. So, in fact, on one of the footages that I've done smart meters or pre-purchase tips, I've shown what a meter box looks like without the plasterboard being there, and saying, if you didn't have plasterboard there and nice paint or wallpaper like you've got in the background there, if we strip that all off there and you just saw the meter box, you would never put your bed up against there. All the mains cabling's coming in there, every wire going to the whole house is there. That is not what a human body should be resting and repairing and sleeping in. So yes, don't put it behind there. If that's the only place you can put it, you've got to move the bed. If you can't move the source and the meter, which can be pretty expensive to do once it's in, and not always possible and quite tricky, but it can be done, you either move the meter or you move away from the meter. Distance is the only thing. There's no shielding for this. There is something called new metal, but it can't be done really. You need to move away from it. And when we say move away, at least 2 meters. Then it will drop, because it drops very quickly by the inverse square rule. 2 meters away, 4 times less, 3 meters away, 9 times less. So every single little distance you move makes a big difference. But move away from it, you need that distance.
So Raph, do the EMF curtains work at all?
No, the EMF curtains won't work with a meter box, because there are 3 different fields associated with a meter box. There's a magnetic field, an electric field, and if you've got a smart meter, there's a high frequency wireless pulse. The curtains will certainly help, and that fabric will help with the wireless pulse, and arguably to a degree the electrical field, but not with the magnetic field, which is what most of the research has gone around with childhood leukemia at very low levels and so on. So No, and that's where it's a great question, because that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. You see a shielding material, but there's different kinds of fields associated, and it doesn't take care of all of them. So if, for example, the bed was on the other wall and we had a smart meter, then the paints and the shielding fabrics and things like that are good. Well, I wouldn't say good. We don't advise shielding. It's an absolute last resort. So we've worked with the power companies here in Australia, very difficult, but worked with the power companies to turn down the power transmission levels of the smart meters to fit external antennas so the transmission doesn't take place from it as well, and move those antennas a distance from where your bed is. So that's how you take care of the high frequency, but the magnetic field, you have to just move a distance. So definitely don't put your bed up against it. In terms of mold, I think we've covered a lot, but if just little things, try in showers to not use small tiles like mosaics or use large format tiles, or use ideally solid panels so that you minimize grout, because grout has sealants in it, but always breaks down over time. In a shower, try to use a base as opposed to a tiled floor, because when water just sits on grouting, eventually it's going to go through. And ventilation and all the rest. So I think we've gone through so many, could speak all day about that. And we've probably spoken about what to do about it when it's there in remediation.
Good one, Raph. Amelia, Raph is on the board at our school. Our school is quite new, so you can imagine I'm super excited because he gets to talk about where the wireless goes and where the electricity goes. And so my kids are obviously going to be to the advantage of that. I reckon this one's for you, Amelia. This one's from Bianca, also on SpeakPipe. It's around geeking on numbers.
Hi, Amelia, Raphael, and Bryce. Hope you're all doing well despite the lockdown. Just a question. I'm a huge fan of all three of you, but I'm just wondering, have you ever done analysis of how much you save with a smart home, being water, having solar panels? I'm just wondering if you've done any, geeking over numbers to see how much money you actually save, because some people like us, we do it for the environment, but also for our pockets as well. I would love to hear your answers, and love that billabong that you have at your backyard, Amelia. Love it. Thank you. Bye.
Amelia, admiring of your billabong in the backyard.
Yeah, she's been watching my Instagram stories. So
you got a lot of acres at your place.
We do. We're on almost 80 acres. So, the thing with solar is that it's got so many variables based on the house itself, the energy use of the people living in the house, where the solar panels are actually positioned, the efficiency of the solar panels themselves. It can even come down to your roof color, because a darker roof will actually generate heat behind the solar panels and reduce the efficiency at which the solar panels can work. So there's so many little nuances. Saying that though, I remember when I went to university way back in I started my degree in 92, so a long time ago. And the solar research around at that time was that the payback period was anywhere between, to sort of 15 and 20 years to invest in solar. It's now around 3 to 5 years for solar. So that's amazing. So I think that when you start to look at the numbers, you can see how quickly you can pay back the system. The things that you need to take into account are what is it going to, take for you to physically buy the brand of solar that you want to have. Most solar units these days have over 25 years warranty. So that payback period really stacks in terms of the longevity of the panels themselves. And then it's thinking also about, a lot of people will not think about their own household energy use. They'll go and invest in solar and then do nothing about their own household energy use. So, it's this thing of actually do yourself a favor in terms of looking at your appliances, looking at your lighting, your air conditioning, anything that is sucking energy in the house, and what you can do to reduce the overall energy use that you have in your home, because then your solar panels are going to be able to have even, a far greater impact on your everyday costs and lifestyle. So I think that that's really good to look at. There's this great free Facebook group out there called My Efficient Electric Home, where there are people geeking out every day on all sorts of things, including looking at their solar, their investment in solar versus their savings on their energy bills as well. So I really recommend that Facebook group.
Good, thank you, Amelia. Bianca, we might get that link from Amelia and put it in the show notes so that you can actually go and talk to the geeks who love the numbers. And clearly, I asked Raph this question, Amelia, the other day. He goes, I don't care about the numbers. I just want the outcome. I just want to make sure that it suits what I'm looking for. And I guess that's what you expect from him as well, because it's all about the outcome for him. So, hey, Raph, it's been awesome to catch up with you. It's a little unusual, this episode. It's probably more in Amelia's lane on her podcast than it is on ours, but I really wanted to share it because I found it fascinating. And I think there's some enormous takeaways that I think even people who aren't going down the path of, going to the extent that you did, there's little takeaways that they can do. Someone who's building a house, someone who's designing it at the moment, someone who's thinking about some of these principles, someone who's feeling unwell, someone who might be feeling a bit foggy. I think there's so much in it for everyone as a cross section anyway, that I really wanted to share this story, and I really wanted Amelia to help me given her expertise. So, mate, I appreciate you coming on. We will get some of those links that you talked about. A, how to get in contact with you. B, how to look at some of the materials that you've created so that people can get access to that. But Amelia, it's been an interesting story.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I'm actually really, really excited that you're sharing this content on the Property Couch podcast, because there's so many people who move into rental properties, particularly that have issues around condensation and mould, and have to just suffer whatever is dealt up to them. And the standard of our construction generally in this country is lower than it should be in terms of supporting their health and well-being of all citizens. And so I really love that you're getting this information into the hands of people who might be building to rent as much as building to own, because I think that we could really work a lot harder to elevate the standard of our construction generally and improve the health and well-being of everybody. So rising tide floats all boats, remember? I think it's it's definitely along those lines. So thanks so much, Bryce. It's been great to be part of it.
Yeah, well said too there. So Raph, we're going to let you go at this point, and again, on behalf of the community, thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Really appreciate being able to give this information to people and learning from you as well, Amelia. So it was wonderful to meet you, and thank you.
Cheers, Raph.
It's a pleasure. Well, there you go, Amelia. What an interesting story. I loved the input that you gave, and I appreciate that. But I think it'd be fair to say that Raph was going to do that no matter what the cost, because he just wanted the outcome. So how do you reconcile that between his clear passion and it was only ever going to be that way versus, you're talking to clients in the field every day where budget does matter?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is it's this alignment between figuring out how passionate you are and what does that passion actually mean in terms of where you spend your money. Because at the end of the day, our spending decisions are the biggest impact on kind of how we can change this world, I think. So it is that thing of understanding that. And at the same time, knowing that a house or a new house or a renovation has to cost a certain amount and fit into your overall finances. I think that it's always worth understanding that if you are planning on doing a sustainable home, you've got to figure out what your priorities are. And, at the very least, if you design or renovate a house to suit the orientation of its site and you adopt those passive solar design aspects, which are such a critical part of a passive house generally, but are just foundational to good quality design, then you can go a long way to reducing your home's energy use, improving your health and well-being in it. And then, then you can start to layer on the other things that might be around the insulation that you're using, the material selections, the things that you're fitting out on the inside, so that you can still achieve fantastic efficiency and, lower your energy use and improve the quality of your indoor air and the quality of your home and the contribution it makes to the built environment and the sustainability overall on any budget. I'm a firm believer that it's all about what decisions you prioritize up front and just making sure that you have the right team around you to help you make informed decisions as you go.
I just want to give a little plug to your podcast. I've listened to plenty. I get my team. There is a series you did. You'll know it off by heart. I can't remember it, but just on orientation. If you've got a north orientation, if you've got an east orientation, if you've got just that series alone for any serious person who loves property is going to serve them. You've got a whole range of materials. I'll let people go to your site. We'll put a link in the show notes so they can go and check it out. There's heaps of materials. Yeah. But just that alone just gives it an awareness around, because a lot of people are clueless that you should be buying with the sun as you should be the agent for the sun.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely something that I still find people just have no idea why it matters to know where north is in the Southern Hemisphere. So yeah, that season 1 is a great sort of run through of understanding what the light from different directions is going to mean for how you live in your house and what that's going to mean for the way that you design or renovate your home. And then also season 8 that we have is called A Simple Guide to a Sustainable Home. There's about 16 episodes, including 5, I think, on passive house, that go through different understandings of what sustainability means and how to go about achieving sustainability in your home on any budget. So yeah, lots of good resources there.
We're going to put the link in the show notes for those who want to check out Amelia, and I recommend it because I listened to it. Now, life hack today, I asked you to come up with a life hack. Now, it's in the lane that we've been chatting about today. Can you give us your life hack?
Yeah, well, one of the things that Raph was talking about was passive house, and I talked about the PHPP modelling tool. What a lot of homeowners might not know when they're building their new home or for a lot of significant renovations is that they'll have to get an energy assessment as part of getting their construction certificate or their building approval. In locations around Australia, that's known as our NatHERS, or a National Housing Energy Rating Scheme, and it's an assessment then that measures the star rating of the home that is about the heating and the cooling energy requirements of that home. Something that I'm really encouraging homeowners to do now is to bring that energy assessment process forward and into their design phase, where they work with the energy assessment professional to give them feedback on how their home is rating in its energy efficiency as they're designing it, because then it will enable them to make data-driven decisions. There's a lot of people who think, oh, well, look, I'm just going to put double glazing, and then that's the thing that gets chopped because of their budget. But if you actually start to understand what is that spend on double glazing going to mean for how much energy it might save you versus are you better off actually upping the insulation that you're including in your home? Raph talked about insulating the underside of your slab. That's definitely a necessary thing in some climates, but in other climates, it's not so much of a requirement. So when you bring that energy assessment forward, it's really then giving you the opportunity to get that design input that can then mean that it's not a nasty surprise of add-ons at the point of getting your approvals. Oftentimes people go for that approval, they find out that they're not getting 6 stars, and then they have to add all these things and the design's already fixed in place. If you can get that information upfront as part of your design process, it makes a huge difference to the success of your design process and the performance of your home overall.
I love that life hack because I'm in the design process now for my house, and I'm absolutely going to be doing that. So very, very timely, and definitely taking your advice on that, which is good. Hey, what's making property news, Amelia?
Well, you've heard us talk a lot about mould. Condensation is a really big thing that's getting a lot of airtime. It always has inside the industry, but I'm seeing now it proliferate more into the public domain. There's some changes coming that are proposed for the National Construction Code in 2022 that are going to increase the requirements for construction around preventing condensation in homes. It's been seen as a big challenge in homes generally. We've had the leaky building issues in New Zealand and in Canada. Australia is now starting to catch up on understanding that construction needs to be better in order for us to prevent condensation in homes. So we're looking at changes to wall wraps and vapor management overall that I think is going to really be important consideration. There's actually a condensation handbook, which I'll shoot you a link so that you can put it into the resources, that is available publicly. It's a PDF that's been put together by the Australian Codes Board. And it has a great checklist in the back of it when you're designing, when you're constructing, and as an occupant to understand how to reduce condensation in your building. It's like a 165-page document, but if the very least you can just look through those last pages as a checklist when you're working with your designer and your builder, it'll take you a long way to preventing condensation in your home. Condensation is the starting point of mould. So it's a really good thing to know.
No, definitely a very good thing to know. So big episode. We covered a lot of ground. We not only did we get to learn a little bit about your money story, but we clearly learned a lot about healthy homes today. And again, I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your experience, and joining us on the Property Couch today, Amelia.
Really appreciate the opportunity to be part of it, Bryce. It's been fantastic to spend this time with you and be able to share this information with your audience.
Yeah, no, thank you. And generally at this point, I shoot it over to Ben, but he's not around. So folks, stick around. We got one more in our AweGuest series next week. So hang around for that. But knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. We'll see you next week, folks. Hey there, folks. Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.